This is the tournament for the youngsters, it feels. Regan, of course, a lot of really good accomplishments as a Masters player alone, but a huge career in the senior age division. Just last year, Fresno Regional Champion, OCIC finalist, Portland Regionals finalist, playing that Qian Pao Baxcalibur deck. I'm pretty sure that's a fan favorite. I know there's going to be a lot of players rooting for Regan just based on his deck choice.
Yeah, Regan had an incredible season last year, let alone the fact that he was a first-year master. You know, 15th-year masters would have loved to have had the season that Regan had last year, but things have been quite a bit slower. He's had his fair share of day twos this season, had one top 32 finish, but this is his first top cut appearance of this 2024 season, and it is with Qian Pao, something he has been playing quite a bit so far this year. On the other side of the table, we will have Jake Ewart, player who we've seen on the stream, probably most known for his shining moment a few regionals ago, playing Venomoth Spidops, a crazy stream match I will never forget. Without a doubt, this has tied his best previous finish with that top 4 at Madison Regionals back in 2018.
Indeed, that infamous Venomoth, but playing a more standardized deck this time around, that Ancient Box, and seems like it's working out really, really well for him. It's been a while since Jake has made a top cut, but he's back here in the final stage, and with what I would honestly venture to say a pretty good matchup for him.
Yeah, I have to think so as well. It's different from what we saw from Regan earlier in Swiss when he played up against Cyrus. Cyrus was playing the Roaring Moon-focused deck, not able to get to big numbers super quickly to swing that 1 to 2 prize trade favor. But Jake's deck, on the other hand, there are a ton of Ancient cards in this list. We're sure to see some high-flying action here, and we'll see how quickly we can get to the point where those Roaring Moons are able to take one-hit KOs on Qian Pao EX.
Important to note, both players prizing Radiant Greninja again. I think we are cursed to see
the second time you and I have seen that today.
Yeah. Funnily enough, might be less impactful as usual for Regan than Jake, as Jake does need that little bit of extra help to see more of those Ancient cards, get rid of them, get them in the discard pile to push for those big KOs. But certainly doesn't need all of them, just like in the Charizard matchup. Hitting only 15 should be reasonable for Jake here.
The fist bump, and here we go. Top 4 kicking off 75 minutes to see which of these players will find themselves in our Orlando Regional Championship Finals. Jake Ewart opens up that Roaring Moon from the brand new Temporal Forces expansion, and over on the left side of the table, Regan is kicking things off. He is going first. He has started the Qian Pao and is using that powerful Shivery Chill ability.
Gonna very quickly find out that Radiant Greninja is not available to him, which is so crucial in the early game. Of course, you want your Frigibaxes, your Bidooфs, but to get you going, to get you those few extra cards in the beginning, Radiant Greninja so clutch and not available. But as we can see, Regan being thorough with his price checking. I mean, maybe he's like very good at it, but he doesn't. I feel like he doesn't figure out all 6 prize cards immediately, which I think is pretty smart.
Yeah, we're not seeing the whole move the Pokemon to the front, the energies to the back, figuring out all 6 prizes on the very first search, taking things a little slower, and this is probably exactly why Hisuian Heavy Ball in the opening hand allows Regan to see his prize cards, and he'll be able to grab any Pokemon from there, put that into his hand, and Gradient Greninja is just the perfect find at this spot.
When you have that Hisuian Heavy Ball in your starting hand, you actually hope you prize something good, right? That way you have immediate access to that, and then you also have immediate knowledge to all of your prizes, as you mentioned, Chip. So that's going to be very good. And possibly all the key cards, the energy on the Qian Pao at the bottom now, so Regan shouldn't struggle too much with anything from his prize cards at this point.
Regan discards a Water Energy to use Concealed cards on Radiant Greninja, drawing him 2 cards from the top of the deck. I do not see any Buddy Poffin at the moment, but a couple of Nest Ball will ensure Regan can get his Pokemon set up into play.
Indeed. Obviously, you want that double Frigibax if possible, because Jake's deck can be very aggressive early on, so you want to make sure you get those resources out as soon as you can. Now, double Nest Ball, and there is an Ultra Ball as well available, so could set up the double Frigibax. We'll see if he chooses to do that.
Yeah, I think Regan will feel a little less pressured in this matchup compared to something like the Roaring Moon matchup that we saw earlier, because Cyrus was playing Prime Catcher. Jake, on the other hand here, playing the Awakening Drum as the A-spec of choice. So while Jake could technically find a combination of cards, I think, actually, I don't even know if he can to knock out the Frigibacks, right? There's no way to switch the active Pokemon. He'd have to Dark Patch, play a boss's orders, right? There's no switch, so I think Regan recognizes that this Frigibax is safe. He can take the turn to get Bidoof down as well. With that energy attachment to Chien-Pao, we now will kick things off on Jake's end of the field. Starts by putting that Pokestop Stadium in play. I think he's going to need some help off of this. Just a bunch of energy in the hand at the moment. Discarding a Roaring Moon and Explorer's Guidance, but able to find the Pokegear 3.0 to add that to the hand. It does at least have an Explorer's Guidance. Okay.
Yep, we'll be able to take a look at those top 6 cards. That Roaring Moon would have been something Jake would have liked to find right here. Does need a little bit of help as we see the Fire Energy in the deck.
Yeah, Fire Energy in the deck to use the Shred attack on the Koraidon, but I don't see an out to another basic Pokemon. Jake shaking his head because this is a very risky position. I don't think he has any Nest Ball in his hand. He's not playing Artisan. He's got that Pokestop in play. He's already utilized it. I think he's going to have to attach to Roaring Moon and probably pass the turn. And that is a lot to ask for Regan to whiff an attack this next turn.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Regan is holding Rare Candy and Ultra Ball in hand, combined with that Shiver Chill ability. I think we're going to see a very, very quick game 1 here, Chip. Unfortunate situation for Jake, and this is something we've mentioned throughout the weekend. When do you Pokestop first? When do you use the
supporter for turn?
Supporter first, exactly. Like, can you risk discarding? There's so many variables that go on into that decision.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure, like, sometimes you get what you need, other times you don't.
Yeah.
You need to assess whether the risk is acceptable.
The attachment is made, and Jake will just pass, and Regan shows, I've got more than enough. Top decks the Baxcalibur, just for good measure. Of course, can use the Shivery Chill to grab the energy needed, and Regan takes out that Roaring Moon and moves on to game 2 here in top 4.
Not the high-level back-and-forth match we would have liked to see, but there's still 2 more games to go for this to end. So hopefully this next game, I mean, Jake is playing a deck with, well, 13 basic Pokemon.
Yes.
So not having another one, combined with 4 Nest Ball, combined with 2 Ultra Ball, this is an outlier. This is not what you would expect normally with an Ancient Box deck.
And I do think Jake's decision to use the Pokestop first before the supporter actually was correct in this instance. He had a bunch of Darkness Energy in his hand. If he draws off the Pokestop an Earthen Vessel, or if he discards another Darkness Energy, he actually can use Sada for the turn as a supporter to get an attachment, and then hope to find a Pokemon, right? Yep. So I think that the way he played it out totally makes sense. Just maybe cards didn't fall into his favor this time, and we'll have to hope for better fortune moving forward in this top 4.
Indeed, just like there was a combination of cards that didn't favor Jake at the very top, there could have been many others that definitely would have favored him. Energies at the top, Nest Balls at the top, Ultra Ball at the top. So that's something you have to factor in. You know your deck, you know what outs you have available, and therefore I would agree it was the correct choice. Unfortunately, in this instance, the cards just didn't cooperate.
Now, I'll be interested to see if Jake chooses to go first or second here. And I think similarly to what we mentioned with Cyrus earlier on when Regan played against Cyrus in Swiss, I think I'd like to see Jake choose to go first. What do you think of that, Pablo?
I would also like that. Gets you that first energy attachment. Gives you 1 extra turn to have a stable board before your opponent does something.
Prize cards going out. Nothing too bad for either player. Regan did prize the Silene, which is a 1-of supporter. Also prized that Iron Bundle and a Baxcalibur. The Baxcalibur's at the bottom. He may be able to find that early. And of course, Heavy Ball can grab out the bundle. Jake Ewart is going to choose to go first. A Pablo and Chip approved decision here from Jake, and kicks things off immediately with Earthen Vessel, discarding the Fighting Energy from the hand and now searching the deck for any 2 energy cards he would like and placing them into his hand.
Greninja deciding not to hide in the prize cards this time around, and Jake with the double Nest Ball, a much more powerful and better start for Jake. Will have access to extra energies thanks to the Greninja, and then hopefully Regan can match that, and we can see a fully developed game of these two decks.
Jake taking the moment to shuffle the deck here. Has multiple energy in the hand now from the Earthen Vessel, so we'll at least get an attachment to one of these Roaring Moon, and also, let's not forget, we'll be able to draw cards thanks to Greninja's Concealed Cards ability. Darkness Energy going down, 2 cards from the top. The Penny, not super useful, but another Roaring Moon is not too bad. And that Ancient Booster Energy Capsule, that's something that definitely could be a factor in this matchup.
Indeed, needing 4 energies to knock out a Roaring Moon with that Hail Blade attack instead of 3 is actually very demanding on the resources of Qianbao decks. Now, going second for Regan does give him the benefit of being able to utilize Irida to find those body puffins, so essentially extra outs to be able to pull that off, and usually can help you get a better setup at the expense of being on the offense.
Regan flashing the Radiant Greninja to Jake, saying, hey, don't worry, we've got the homie here for this one. Of course, Regan kicks things off, utilizing Shivery Chill, searching the deck for 2 basic waters, and is going to take a moment now to check the prize cards, maybe a little more thoroughly than he did in game number 1, since he knew that Heavy Ball was going to be played right away. And immediately as well, we are seeing the Buddy Poffin and the Radiant Greninja brought to the front of the deck. That is sending off the alarm bells of an incoming Irida to me.
I would agree with that, Chip. And let me ask you something. Do you think Radiant Greninja is the best shiny Pokemon ever printed in the trading card game?
Honestly, I don't like to make calls like this until a card has seen its entirety of its time in the standard format, potentially rotates out. But to be honest, I think Radiant Greninja might just be the best Pokemon ever printed of any of the Pokemon that have existed in the game. It's definitely the best shiny Pokemon that's been printed.
Okay, that's a bold statement. The best Pokemon.
Yeah, it certainly rivals that Zoroark GX, Arceus Dialga Palkia, even things like good old Neo Cleffa, in my opinion. Radiant Greninja, an incredible, incredible card, and been a mainstay in decks ever since it's been in the format as an attacker, as a support option. We see it in both of the decks here, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
I would agree, Chip. I think Radiant Greninja is a fantastic card. We see how essential it is, especially for Jake's deck, but also for Regan. Just get those extra resources into play, and fantastic, fantastic draw for Regan at this point. And another thing you can know at this point for both players is that there's going to be very little hand disruption, right? So both players will be able to play out whatever they have in their hand with very little fear of it getting affected in the long run, which I think benefits Jake a little bit more than Regan.
Yeah, I think so, because Regan does continually need to try to thin his hand down to play cards like Superior Energy Retrieval. Of course, also will be playing Ultra Balls, whereas Jake can just play Sada, play that Explorer's Guidance every single turn, fill the hand up, increase the hand size. I think in about 10 minutes or so, we'll look at Jake's 20-card hand and be trying to figure out how we got here.
Oh, certainly. And now Regan's game plan has to be to take as many prizes on these Roaring Moons as possible, with Qianbao hoping that he does it fast enough before the Roaring Moon gets to enough cards in the discard pile, in order to get or reach for those one-hit KOs. Regan can also hope that at some point Jake misses some power up on the Roaring Moon, misses a turn that way. But I feel like towards the end of the game, when those Roaring Moons are hitting at full power, that 2-for-1 prize exchange is going to be difficult for Regan to overcome.
Regan has a solid setup here, a pair of Frigibacks and Bidoof with an energy card on his active Qianbao. Back over to Jake now, utilizing that Poké Stop. Does find a Superior Energy Retrieval and a Nest Ball. Discarding the Ancient Booster Energy Capsule, which is fine. There's 4 copies of the card in this deck, and of course you do need Ancient cards in the discard pile at some point.
Oh, certainly. And now Professor Sada not being utilized to the maximum of its capabilities, only attaching 1 energy instead of 2, but that usually happens in the early game. Not great hand so far for Jake, not a great follow-up at this point in time, and Greninja is great. But if you don't have energies, Greninja is just a sitting duck. on your bench.
Yeah, Jake does have that superior energy retrieval in his hand, a one-of card that he plays, usually used in the end game to discard extra ancient cards to reach higher damage numbers. Also can recover energy. I wonder if it would ever be worth it to even just use that here to try to draw a couple cards, because Jake's setup is not the best at this point.
Certainly not the best. Probably in the back of his mind to try to get a little bit more value from that superior energy retrieval. But as you mentioned, you might need those cards right now, right? Or
you can't worry about planning for the end game if you're not going to get to the end game.
Exactly, yeah. And that's something that we see even like just how decks are built, right? You have to factor in the consistency versus utility to make sure that you're not adding too many cards to try to cover so many things, but then your early game is so awkward and just not great that you never get to that end point where you get to use those tech cards.
Vengeance Fletching, hitting for 110 damage, setting up for the 2-hit knockout on the Chien Pao EX. Now, I am interested to see where Regan goes from here. Does he try to just swing with his Chien Pao? It's a pretty poor trade. Could he establish another one potentially? Of course, step one is going to be getting Baxcalibur out. I don't know, Pablo. How does Regan navigate this? It definitely already is seeming tough so early in this game.
I think Regan has a pretty big clue from the previous turn. Jake did not use the Radiant Greninja, only used Professor Sada to attach this one energy. I think you can say with a lot of confidence that Regan knows that Jake does not have access to energy in his hand, didn't even get an attachment for a turn. So I think as Regan, you try to make it as difficult as possible for your opponent to attack you consecutively. So taking the KO on this Roaring Moon seems like the best course of action. Doing so with a brand new Chien Pao is considerable, but I think that's the biggest decision. I think you have to go after the energy in this instance.
Two energies are being grabbed from the Shivery Chill, and the Chien Pao was brought to the front of the deck. It does appear that there is a Nest Ball in this hand, and I think I see a Rare Candy, also the Ultra Ball. So Regan is working with just about everything he needs at this spot. He's going to make sure he sequences this out super well, of course. Regan's a very smart player. Probably attach, retreat this Chien Pao, Shivery Chill, bring a couple more energies out of the deck, go for the concealed cards, and then go for Ultra Ball, Irida, whatever it is he needs.
There's a retreat into Chien Pao, thinning those energies through Shivery Chill, which makes, if Regan decides to use this Pokestop, even better odds to hit those item cards that you need.
Yep, Regan knows what he's doing here. He didn't get to an 11-0-4 record by mistake. Definitely very wise up to the correct sequencing decisions to make with Chien Pao. Radiant Greninja using concealed cards, discarding an energy to draw two, finds that Prime Catcher, normally very powerful. I don't think it's super useful in this position, but, you know, it's nice to have in the hand.
Yeah, definitely not useful in this position, but in a late game situation, Regan could try to trap one of the unpowered Roaring Moons and use Greninja to attack the other two twice in a row, and that could allow him to overcome a price deficit if he needs to. But for now, taking down the energies in the active spot, definitely Regan's best choice and has the resources to do so.
Exactly, especially with this Irida now being played. Regan's one supporter able to be played per turn, searching the deck for a water Pokemon and an item card, normally grabbing Rare Candy and Baxcalibur, but we saw off the Pokestop, Rare Candy has already been found. That affords Regan the opportunity to get a more powerful resource for later in the game into his hand right now. He doesn't have to worry about trying to do it later, and that resource found is the superior energy retrieval. Or debating potentially going with the Earthen Vessel.
Yeah, Earthen Vessel could be a choice just as discard fodder. I think Regan has pretty much access to all the energies he could possibly want, but the one missing piece is that B-Barrel. Just in case Jake does have some sort of hand attack or hand disruption, there's also the possibility that we could see an Airy somewhere, like a sneaky Airy. You don't know your opponent's exact 60 cards, so being ready even for that situation could be very, very important.
Now, one thing to keep in mind, I would say Jake's list overall is pretty normal to what you would expect from an Ancient Box list. We were talking about you don't know exactly what your opponent could be playing. He does have the Great Tusk in this list with the 2 colorless energy, able to use the land collapse attack where you discard a card from the top of your opponent's deck, but if you played an ancient supporter from your hand during that turn, you actually discard the top 4 cards instead. Not sure if that's something Regan has any information on existing, but Regan's deck here on turn 2 is already pretty thin.
Yep, running full engine for Regan. Pretty much picture perfect setup for him. Gets the knockout. 4 energies for a single prize card, as mentioned, is a little tough to keep up for the rest of the game. But a harsh Pokestop for Jake right there.
Yeah, no hits at all. Discarding a couple of ancient cards, one of them being Asada, and Jake looking at his Pokegear in hand, wondering what could have been.
We're going to see something, Chip. I don't see a supporter.
One
Last
more card. It is the Sada. What a hit on the 7th card. Hey, we take those. That's why, you know, it's the top 7, not the top 6.
Yeah.
We get that last card. Sometimes that's what makes all the difference. And this will be a full value Professor Sada's Vitality as well, getting a energy card from the discard pile to 2 of the ancient Pokemon that Jake has in play. I think the only other question here is, can Jake get to enough ancient cards in the discard pile to get a 1-hit knockout on this Chien-Pao EX?
That is definitely the dream. I wish we had a ancient card counter, just like the Lost Zone counter, so that we could figure out exactly how many. But Jake will do that favor for us. Let's see if we can figure out. He does need 15, which is a really big ask.
Yeah, it's a lot of cards, but it's much more doable in a deck like this as opposed to the straight Roaring Moon deck that we saw earlier. And with superior energy retrieval in the hand, he's actually utilizing it now to get rid of a pair of Koraidon. That's 2 more ancient cards into the discard pile. Also adds some energy cards to the hand, can get the attachment to the active, and also get a few more cards drawn from the concealed cards. Finds another ancient card in that Flutter Mane, attaches the energy for turn. Let's see if we can get the count here.
Yeah, would love to know how many cards are in Jake's discard pile. Do we have enough? Needs 15 for Vengeance, Fletching, 2 KO. Does declare the attack, so I guess we're about to find out. Seems like it's not quite enough, Chip.
Yes, just short. Needed 4 more ancient cards in the discard pile. That would have gotten him there, but as it stands, he is unable to piece together that knockout. And that's a sigh of relief, honestly, for Regan in this position. Exactly what he needs.
Definitely a sigh of relief now. Regan will be able to take another prize card, then Jake will respond, evening up things at 4 and 4. But that's when this next attack for Jake could turn things around. Regan can only take 1 prize at a time on the single prize Pokemon, but Jake does have the possibility to take 4 prizes over the course of 2 turns and get ahead.
I think what Regan is going to need to do is try to utilize Radiant Greninja a lot, like 3 to 4 times, probably 4 times, honestly, if he wants to come out ahead in this game. Now, Jake does have a bit of an answer to that. He is playing the Penny in his list. That's a nice way that you can get some healing, deny multi-prize turns in a matchup just like this one. Part of me honestly wonders if in the Ancient Box lists, if Penny has been included for more of that reason against Greninja than even things like the Pidgeotto and Snorlax control decks.
Yeah, I would agree that. Now, in order to use Greninja multiple times, Regan did just play a Super Rod this turn, and that's exactly what you need to get back the Greninja, because you know it's very unlikely for it to survive the turn against such an aggressive deck. You can combine it with Prime Catcher to try to trap one of the unpowered Roaring Moons, but if that doesn't work out, then you are going to need to use those Super Rods. 1 is down, Regan does play 3, so still in a good spot, but as you mentioned, needs to find a way to take KOs without utilizing 2 prize Pokemon.
In a spot like this, I maybe wouldn't hate to see Regan go after like the Radiant Greninja or something like that. It's a way that you can take your opponent's draw out of play, and also at the same time you KO a Pokemon that's not an ancient Pokemon, because every single KO from Regan is boosting the damage from Jake just a little bit more. Not that it's going to matter too much right now, but it could matter later in the game if Regan's trying to stick a Chien-Pao EX or Iron Hands EX even in the active spot to survive a hit. Regan does jump a little more farther ahead with another KO, 4 prizes to 6 now. And Jake is kicking things off with the Earthen Vessel, discarding Flutter Mane, grabbing out a Darkness Energy and a Fire Energy from the deck.
Yeah, that fire energy, very useful to power up Koraidon, just in case that little bit of extra damage shred does allow you to do 130 and bypass any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon, such as a Noivern GX,
Yes.
a Noivern EX, stopping you from attacking. Not a very common sight, but perhaps you can manage your energies, no problem.
Yeah, I think in the deck building process, this is a deck that can afford to play that extra off energy. Jake only playing 1 fighting, 1 fire, and then of course the 6 darkness energy. Now the Pokegear 3.0 looks at the top 7 cards of the deck, able to find that Explorer's Guidance. Now, because Jake got that extra energy accelerated last turn with the Professor Sada, he's able to utilize the Explorer's Guidance this turn, isn't forced into playing the Sada every single turn.
Is not forced, as you mentioned, Chip. However, Jake is forced to play 1 next turn, does have the attachment for the active, but how are we going to power up this Roaring Moon? We need that Professor Sada as soon as we can, and I believe there was 1 played early on, there was 1 discarded by the Pokestop, and there was 1 played last turn. Therefore, there's only 1 Professor Sada left, along with the Palpad.
Yes, Jake does have that 1 copy of Palpad, perhaps a good find off of the incoming Explorer's Guidance. Before playing it, though, will utilize Super Odd. He does need to get some more Pokemon in play at some point, more than likely, and Nest Ball can ensure that that will happen. Did see that Sada there in the deck. Didn't quite notice the Palpad, though. We'll have to keep our eye out for that recovery potential card. Jake will also discard a couple cards thinking about the penny going down. And that is something that could potentially be abused by Regan, knowing that penny is not available.
Yeah, penny not available here for Jake could be impactful and could lead to the Greninja play that we were talking about, trapping any of these Roaring Moons that do not have energy attached to them. And with 3 Professor Sada in the discard pile, it's certainly something that could easily happen.
Jake, I think, still needing an energy card as well here. At least needs to attach it. There is 1 in the hand, so he at least has that guaranteed. But first, Explorer's Guidance. The brand new Ancient Supporter will look at the top 6 cards of the deck. Jake will add 2 to the hand and send 2 to the discard pile. And talk about supporters there, Pablo.
I think there's 3 other Explorer's Guidance right there, which definitely doesn't help Jake too much. I'm not sure you need the Super Rod at that point. You have enough energies, you just put a few back, but oof, I feel like I would really like to keep both Pokegears because you really cannot afford not to play Professor Sada next turn in order to keep up with Regan's pressure.
Yeah, playing Sada absolutely mandatory next turn. Now, Jake's deck has gotten pretty thin, so maybe he thinks there's a decent chance that he'll be able to find it. The odds may favor him, but it is 1 Sada left in the deck that he needs to find. And like you said, it's mandatory next turn.
Yep, it's 100% mandatory, along with finding an energy.
Yeah,
so many pieces needed for Jake at this point in time. We'll take a KO. We'll get 2 more resources from the prize cards, but the last Professor Sada is in the prize cards.
No,
Chip.
not even in the deck. Yeah, that is not good for Jake. He is going to have to find Palpad, probably off the Pokestop, and then utilize the Pokegear 3.0 to try and get a Sada next turn. For now, though, Regan will promote the Radiant Greninja of his own. Does that signal this is the time to attack with Radiant Greninja? Or is Prime Catcher going to be the play from Regan Retzloff?
I mean, if it was time to attack with Radiant Greninja, then you would want to combine that with Prime Catcher, right? So you would want it on the bench,
Sure,
ready to come up. Regan probably doesn't know that there's no Professor Sada available for Jake as of this moment. Could be planning to do the Iron Hands play. He does have the space right here to take down the Radiant Greninja and get 2 more prizes, but then Jake immediately gets 2 prizes back, and you're not asking anything from your opponent. So I'm not sure what Regan could be planning here. Maybe using a fresh Chin pile, though at this point I have to imagine that there's enough cards in the discard pile to get a one-shot, right?
Yeah, it's definitely getting close. I mean, Jake did put a couple back into the deck last turn.
True.
With the Super Rod, but also discarded several more from the Explorer's Guidance.
Played a Vessel and whatnot. Well, he got three Explorers into the discard pile, right? So definitely put more than he lost. Have to see what Regan ends up doing. Did not get to catch what the 2 cards from the Cypher Maniac were.
Cypher Maniac's code breaking, letting Regan search the deck for 2 cards, placing them on top of the deck however he would like, not before playing the Superior Energy Retrieval. And it is going to be the Radiant Greninja here, using concealed cards, also receiving 3 energies from the Super Cold of Baxcalibur. So Radiant Greninja is going to be the attacker of choice here for Regan.
I don't like this chip. You're not asking anything from your opponent.
Well,
you're giving him an extra turn to power up. They're guaranteed another prize card. I'm not a fan.
I know for sure that Jake is down 3 Ancient Booster Energy Capsules. So if Jake is down the 4th one as well, this actually does set things up for Regan to win the game in 2 turns, right? He can use Greninja once again, KO both of the Roaring Moons, and then Iron Hands EX KOs the Radiant Greninja. So this could be really a great play from Regan if he's keeping track of Jake's resources, if there are no Ancient Booster Energy Capsules remaining.
Yeah, that is actually very true. I had not considered that. This allows him, and there's the Ancient Booster Energy Capsule, as you mentioned. I think Jake might not know that there's no Lost Vacuum, but I think that's unacceptable, or that's a likely outcome from any list, but doesn't attach it to the one that's damaged.
That's huge. That's huge right here. Jake putting the Ancient Booster Energy Capsule on the other Roaring Moon is going to allow Regan to go for that exact play, taking 2 prizes on the 2 Roaring Moon, and then closing out the game with Iron Hands EX to KO the Radiant Greninja. Now, Jake does still have one play around this if he can see it, though, and that is to utilize Pal Pad to bring back the penny that he discarded earlier on. And it looks like that Pal Pad is about to be played. Let's see if Penny is one of the choices here.
Finding it, though, in time this turn sounds like a tall order, however, so not sure. We'll use the Pokestop first before palpating back those supporters. 1 card left in the deck chip. There is a Lost Vacuum for Jake.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. Could cut off the use for Regan to utilize Pokestop later on, right? So that's something that could come into play. That's the only stadium that either of our 2 players are utilizing here. Jake now the one having to worry about how many cards are remaining in the deck. He does have Boss's Orders in the hand. Could chase the prize cards here potentially with the Chien Pao. Maybe go after the Bibarel, hope to slow down Regan. But he is going to chase the prizes, going after the Chien Pao EX.
Yeah, this is sentencing yourself, though. Like, Regan clearly wants to attack with Radiant Greninja once again next turn. Regan also played Cypher Maniac for 2 cards and did not use any of them after drawing them, so you know he has exactly 2 cards he wants, and one of those was Super Rod, the other was Superior Energy Retrieval, so Regan was ready to do this, but now, once again, you're not asking anything out of Regan in terms of forcing him to attack once again, knocking out these 2 Roaring Moons, and then we have a very clear Iron Hands amp you very much to win the game.
Jake does still have 1 turn to try to play the penny. For now, he will take the 2 prize cards. And honestly, if Jake does play the penny next turn, he'll be the one jumping back ahead in the prize trade.
Yep, he will definitely be that little bit ahead, will have enough powered up to potentially close out the game. Definitely has enough ancient cards in the discard pile by now to one-shot anything that Regan could potentially power up. So, and yeah, and Regan cannot afford to do the amp you very much play this turn.
Definitely, you don't want to put that 2 prize liability into play for your opponent to easily KO to potentially close out the game. Regan will utilize Pokestop, discards the Irida and the Chien Pao EX. Neither of those really too impactful at this point in the game. He's got everything he needs in hand. His hand is not going to be disrupted. Honestly, he probably wanted to draw things like Buddy Poffin and Nest Ball that he could just discard from his hand with the Superior. Now he has kind of a tough choice.
Yeah, it would be easier to discard those. He has too many good cards and that he probably doesn't want to discard too many, but I think it's all going to be on Jake to see that play. Now, he does have Pal Pad put the 2 supporters back. Then he has an energy to guarantee draw them with Greninja, but will that be enough?
One other thing we've got to keep it in mind, we called it out earlier, is we've got to watch how many cards Regan has remaining in the deck. It doesn't look like there are too many, and if he ever goes down to below 4 4 cards remaining in deck. Jake can capitalize with the land collapse of the Great Tusk. And what is this, 7 cards right now?
Yep.
Cypher
7.
Maniac is going to...
2 about to be drawn, probably. Maybe even with the Pokestop, which would leave exactly 4. But Jake doesn't have a way to retreat into the Great Tusk, though. It has to Professor Sada and attach to the Great Tusk, but cannot attach to the active or to the Roaring Moon in case the active goes down,
True.
which you have to assume so, right? So could have been a cool way to close out the game, but might be 1 energy short this time around.
Yeah, can't use the Penny and Sada in the same turn. Doesn't have something like the Flutter Mane in play to be a pivot you could promote and Sada to that. And then retreats. Yeah, so maybe won't quite be able to pull it off. Jake taking a quick little peek, not letting Regan get too keyed in on it, counting how many cards were remaining there in the deck. One of my favorite stories when it comes to a player trying to deck their opponent out was that Sam Chin played against someone at, I think it was like the San Diego Regionals one year, San Jose potentially, and he didn't want his opponent to know he was trying to deck him out. So while he was sitting there at the table, he tried to inconspicuously count the sleeves from the side of the deck while he was sitting across from his opponent, trying to not key them in on, hey, this is my game plan.
You know what's a very easy way to do that? Instead of counting the extra sleeves, you can count the discard pile.
Sure.
And then the cards in
Ask
hand,
how many
and
cards
then
are
the
in
cards
their
into
hand.
play, and that will tell you with subtraction in order how many.
I don't know if
cards are
Sam
left.
wanted to do all that math, to be honest. That might be the situation we find ourselves in. But the situation Jake finds himself in is having to play the Pal Pad, and he is going to put the Penny back into the deck. He does have Pokegear 3.0. Let's see if the Penny is able to pick up the Radiant Greninja. That is Regan's win condition at this point. Is that Radiant Greninja being KO'd? Jake wisely choosing to take that potential liability out of play, and he has just 1 card remaining in the deck, a Professor Sada.
Yep. Does have a Super Red left as well, just in case Regan does knock out the active Pokemon. Then you can draw your Professor Sada, Super Out back the energies, and then power up and finish the game with that last Fletching Vengeance attack. So very well done by Jake. Both players finding the path to victory, but Jake being able to stay 1 step ahead.
And Jake here still having not revealed the Great Tusk as well. He also has Super Rod in the hand, like you mentioned. Perhaps debating playing it right now. He maybe doesn't know Regan's exact list. Regan does not play an Iono, but it's not uncommon for GM Pile players to have Iono in their list. And Jake actually sat next to Fabrizio in top 8, and Fabrizio had an Iono in his list this weekend. So could be something that's on his mind.
Now, this does reduce the possibilities to 1 out of 3 chance at drawing that Professor Sada. So unless Jake is, well, I guess Jake has the Radiant Greninja, so if you draw Professor Sada, you can use that. If you draw an energy, you bench the Greninja, draw the 2 cards. All right, so never mind. Jake is completely fine with this play and playing around a potential Iono, as you mentioned, but if you get Iono'd, then you're not going to have the Radiant Greninja.
That is true. Your
right?
hand is not going to be very good if you get Iono'd.
And if you get Iono'd, you'd want the Professor Sada as
to
the
be
card
the one you
draw.
Yeah. As it stands, here we go. Jake down to just 1 prize card remaining. What can Regan Retzloff do? His seeming only win condition taken away from him on the last turn. It's going to take a moment to count all of his opponent's resources, but Regan should know the cards remaining in his opponent's deck. Energy, Sada, Energy, Radiant Greninja in the hand. Sada even taken off of the prize cards for Jake Ewart here. So a stall option not going to be available right now.
Yeah, Regan trying to manifest a future booster energy capsule or an Iron Crown out of thin air, but unless he's able to do that, then there's no out possible here for Regan. No Pokemon can take a hit from the Roaring Moon. Regan is also aware of what's left in Jake's hand and deck at this point based on the cards played last turn. Therefore, he knows this Roaring Moon cannot be stopped.
The crowd cannot believe the moment we find ourselves here in top 4. And Regan taking a moment to look through the deck, take stock of all of his options, trying to find any path to close out this game. Bundle and Pray may be his only chance. Swing with the Iron Hands EX. and just see if your opponent gets stuck for a turn. Maybe Jake makes a mistake. Anytime you're playing to your opponent making a mistake, that feels like a pretty tough position to find yourself in.
Wholeheartedly agree, as we see the Excalibur not even take a knockout on the active, 10 damage away. If Excalibur did 140 damage instead of 130, I think it would be a slightly different matchup, and Qianpao would be a little more favored, but as it stands, this Vengeance Fletching will seal Game 2.
Jake Ewart taking Game 2, sending us to a Game 3 of top 4. Only one of these competitors can move on to our finals to continue their journey to try to become the Orlando Regional Champion, and Jake is certainly making a case for his Ancient Toolbox deck to be the one etching its way in the finals.
I feel like Great Tusk being included in this deck is a spiritual representation of Venomoth here.
It definitely seems like the type of card Jake would like to include. I wonder if he's cheesed away any wins this weekend that he otherwise would have lost. I mean, it kind of makes sense to play in your deck, to be honest. If your opponent isn't thinking about it, you can just bring it out of nowhere, maybe steal a win you would have lost otherwise, and worst case scenario, it's just another ancient card to go into the discard pile.
Yeah, certainly. Also a fighting type attacker as well, in case you need 1/4 energies, is a big ask. But yeah, I mean, why not give yourself the option in that weird last gasp scenario where you can actually use it to cheese a win, as you mentioned.
The prizes were mapped out pretty nicely from both of these players. You could see what Regan's game plan was after taking a few prize cards with some Qianpao EX. Was able to take 2 prizes in 1 turn with his Radiant Greninja, but Jake had the perfect response, using that penny to pick up his own Radiant Greninja. That was no longer a liability, and Regan didn't even have a way to take a knockout, let alone take 2 prizes in that final turn.
Yeah, the copy of Palpad and the copy of Penny coming in clutch. Without them, Jake would not have been able to win this particular game, so really paying off, and we're gonna see how Regan can adapt to this. Now he will choose, presumably, to go first, try to be the aggressor and make those Qianpaos count as much as possible before Jake's discard pile gets out of control.
Let's look at these prize cards here. 2 superior energy retrieval in the prizes for Regan. Never something you love to see as Qianpao. And over on Jake's end, that 1 copy of Boss's Order is something that could potentially come up. Regan is going to kick things off. Going first, uses Qianpao's Shivery Chill, searching the deck for 2 basic water energy. Will add those into the hand. Certainly looking for some Frigibacks to put into play. Perhaps a Bidoof, Radiant Greninja. Would love to see a full board from Regan's side. While we are waiting for the early turns of this game, we can keep our audience updated on what's happening out in the floor. Of course, our other top 4 match is being played currently. Josh versus Liam into Game 3. Both of those players haven't taken a game thus far in top 4. Going to be incredibly close to see which of these 4 competitors will make it into the finals.
Yeah, Gardevoir, Charizard, Qianpao, and Ancient Box. The 4 decks competing for a place in the finals. Are you happy about Gardevoir doing so well, Chip?
It was one of my predictions for the weekend, so I can't complain too much. And also, you know, the Pidgeot EX being played in Liam's deck. I think I did pretty good on my caster picks this weekend. Sorry, buddy. I don't think I've seen very much Snorlax or Dialga in Top Cut.
Yeah, I definitely have. At least we haven't seen any Lugia up there, right?
You are Lugia's #1 op for sure.
I am 100% against Lugia in this current format. It's just not good, Chip. Just not quite good.
Regan has a solid turn, gets the Frigibacks out and the Bidoof, but no extra cards drawn through something like the Radiant Greninja. On Jake's side has opened up with that Koraidon, that Primordial Beatdown, a pretty decent early game attacking option, dealing 30 damage for each of your ancient Pokemon in play. We'll see if Jake can get enough Roaring Moon onto the bench, and also is he able to get some energy cards in the discard pile and a Professor Sada's Vitality to get off the turn 1 attack.
Getting off a turn 1 attack here for Jake would be fantastic, probably meaning this Qian Pao only takes a single prize card before it goes down. So that'll be a fantastic start for Jake. But as mentioned, overall, if he doesn't do that, eventually the Qian Paos are not cost effective, and Regan just doesn't have a great way to deal with single prize high HP Pokemon, because Excalibur comes up short, Greninja comes up short, and there's the possibility of Ancient Booster Energy Capsule adding to the HP along with the Penny.
See what Jake has in the hand here. Looks like the Awakening Drum will start with the concealed cards. Discards the energy to draw 2, finds the Pokegear. Already has the Sada in the hand, though. This is set up for Jake to at least get off an attack. The question is going to be for how much damage, however.
Oh, it's going to be at least 60 with that Roaring Moon drawn. Could be a little more with these 2 extra cards from Awakening Drum. Not quite.
No other Pokemon found just yet. It does get that fire energy attached to Koraidon. Good use of those 2 energy cards, saving all the darkness energy for your Roaring Moons. And Primordial Beatdown, more like a light punch, I think, compared to a beatdown at this point. 60 damage into Qian Pao EX.
Now, important to mention that there's no darkness energy attached to this Koraidon, so a follow-up Professor Sada would not help the Roaring Moon be able to attack. Does require 1 darkness energy to discard it before you can get closer to that, so small mishap, but the 60 damage could prove to be very useful for Jake next turn.
Regan has plenty of options available here. A couple of energy already, we know, and also that Irida in the hand. He'll kick it off with Qian Pao, Shivery Chill once more, 2 more energy added to the hand. We'll see how he navigates this position. I think with using Shivery Chill, it seems unlikely that Bibarel is going to be worked into the mix this turn, unless it is much later after an Irida, after perhaps a concealed cards. Usually you would like to save that Shivery Chill until after Industrious Incisors has been used.
Yep. I know thinning the deck is very important, but then you would be reducing the amount of cards you get. So Regan will need to piece this KO together. If he does, which I believe he's very close, will be able to take a significant board position here, and it's going to be on Jake to find back-to-back attacks and enough Pokemon to back them up to be able to take over the lead.
Now, off of this Irida, the very first thing Regan brought to the front was that Iron Bundle. That could be a potential option here. Hyper Blower would force Jake to promote one of the other 2 Pokemon on the bench. And it's a little easier here for Regan to get the knockout on either of those 2 Pokemon compared to this Koraidon with that Ancient Booster Energy Capsule attached to it at the moment.
Yeah, 3 energies as opposed to 4. Sometimes you just don't have all the resources to take that KO. But the most important thing to do against a single prize-based deck such as this Ancient Box is to get a KO every single turn.
We'll see if Regan can do just that. Iron Bundle brought to the bench. A rare candy found as the other option, and Hyper Blower used right away. Jake has to debate, what is the card to send up? Do you lose your potential attacker next turn in the Roaring Moon, or do you sacrifice your draw power with Radiant Greninja?
Yeah, and Jake is forced to promote the Roaring Moon because Radiant Greninja, as we've mentioned, is so crucial, and this works out perfectly for Regan because even if Jake finds 5 more Ancient Pokemon and decides to bench them, that's 150 damage, which comes up just 10 damage short of the knockout on this Qian Pao. So very smart move by Regan right here.
Yeah, and even attaching another energy to utilize Shred. The whole reason Jake even plays a fire energy in this deck would not get him there either.
Yep, 130 damage would certainly not be enough, but Ultra Ball discard for Jake also has that Ancient Explorer, and if you still knock out this Qian Pao when your opponent has taken 2 prize cards, that's still fine. The biggest issue would be if Qian Pao ends up taking 3 prize cards before it goes down.
Now, Regan does only have the 1 Excalibur in play, also just the 1 Bidoof. So Jake could utilize something like the Counter Catcher this turn, which he does play 2 copies of to potentially take out one of those 2 support Pokemon. And in this position, normally I'm a big fan of taking out Bidoof. But when your opponent doesn't even have a backup Frigibax, if you can knock out this Baxcalibur, you're guaranteed to buy yourself a turn.
Oh, certainly, Chip. But hitting for 160 damage, though, seems a little difficult in this instance. Even with 5 ancient Pokemon, you'd be at 150 damage.
Yeah. And not many ancient cards were found from this Explorer's Guidance as well. Maybe Jake's one chance to make something like that happen falls pretty short whenever 4 non-ancient cards are sent to the discard pile. The cards that Jake chose to keep were the Pal Pad and that Professor Sada's Vitality, setting up for a future turn. Uses that ancient Earthen Vessel, sending 1 more card to the discard pile, and also getting the 2 energy cards. We can see the concealed cards, drawing Jake a couple more, trying to find some Pokemon. I think, at minimum, getting a prize here. Even though you could have an opportunity to take 2 prizes, you could have an opportunity to knock out the Baxcalibur, at minimum, you need to keep up in this prize trade.
Yeah, doing 60 more damage to a Qianbao is really not relevant at all. So taking and going after that Bidoof seems very important. Potentially for the late game to deny Regan a little bit of resources, make him work a little harder to chain KOs in the later stages of the game. You could even try to hunt down back-to-back Bidoofs or Bibarels, and all of a sudden Regan just starts running out of cards in hand to use those superior energy tribbles and whiffs a knockout at some point.
Ultra Ball finds the Roaring Moon, placing that ancient card to the bench. Now, Jake shuffling. We'll see what he has as an option to attack this turn. There is the attachment, and the counter catcher was found, so he can bring up Bidoof, can keep up in the prize trade, and also target down one of Regan's key support Pokemon.
Yeah, Bidoof, very, very important for the overall deck. Excalibur allows the energy attachment, but Bibarel feels like it finds you absolutely everything you need each and every turn. Now, pitching a KO here for Regan should be pretty straightforward. Does have the superior energy retrieval in hand, has access to Shiver Chill, and has enough excess cards to discard. But with nothing to back it up, it's going to be difficult to do that turn in, turn out.
Regan may be thinking about what other plays could be possibly available to him. This honestly seems like a decent turn to utilize the Iron Hands EX, and that might be what Regan needs to do in this matchup, is use the Iron Hands early whenever your opponent is going to have a very difficult time getting the one-hit KO. And with this Baxcalibur being promoted, is Prime Catcher going to be the move?
I think you're onto something, Chip, and as you mentioned, yeah, that's when the Iron Hands is the safest, and you also get the benefit of denying the Radiant Greninja for your opponent, which we have seen is so clutch.
Irida being played, searching the deck for an item card, a water Pokemon, Radiant Greninja being found, Prime Catcher as well. And has Regan already discarded the Lightning Energy this game? He has not. I don't notice it. It is in the deck still, so that is a piece missing for Regan. Does he have his Earthen Vessel? I don't see it. He may not quite have the pieces to pull off the Iron Hands right now.
Yeah, I think the biggest hurdle for Regan to pull this off is exactly finding that lightning energy. There's no Pokestop to try and dig for it. However, if you try to knock out the Regan Greninja, that could have some impact later, but denying the Roaring Moon, yeah, helps protect your Qianbao, and all of a sudden, this Qianbao could be getting the 3 prize cards that we talked about, making itself very cost-effective for Regan.
Yeah, and you know what? The KO on the Radiant Greninja is still on the table later in the game. Regan playing that 1 copy of Silene to potentially give himself at least a 75% chance to reuse Prime Catcher. This is going to work out pretty nicely, and Regan is doing everything he can to try to get the most use from this Qianbao EX.
Yep, now that Bidoof is definitely very clearly missing for Regan, though. And as mentioned, so far so good for Regan, but getting to that final stage, getting to the final moments of the game, finding enough pieces to pull off the Silene, plus having enough to discard, plus the Iron Hands, that could be a little bit of a struggle thanks to that early knockout by Jake.
Jake will utilize Earthen Vessel to discard a Darkness Energy, another Ancient card to the discard pile, another Energy card to the discard pile, and 2 Energy being found from the deck.
More and more thinning, but Jake is now down 2 Roaring Moons without actually having attacked with any of them. And even though Koraidon is a pretty good
Two energy now in the hand for Jake. Does he have a Roaring Moon to even start accelerating to potentially? That is another question here.
had to get rid of 2 nest balls the previous turn off of the Explorer's Guidance, which was very harsh when you really want multiple Roaring Moon in play, not only to power up the Primal Beatdown, but just to power itself, to power them up, to be able to dish enough damage in the later stages of the game.
It looks like we've got a stoppage of play here, potentially. We're getting things sorted out. Potentially an audio issue, I think, making sure our players can hear one another, can hear the judges, but it looks like things are all sorted. I know we lost audio in our ears for a moment there, Pablo, but we're all back online. We're all good. Radiant Greninja drawing a couple cards, finds the Sada, but no Roaring Moon.
Do you ever consider going with the Great Tusk here?
I mean, we got to do something. Jake shaking his head, not really pumped about the situation. Didn't even find, or does he have his other counter catcher? I actually think he does have his other counter catcher, so at minimum can still keep up in the prize trade.
Yeah.
We could see it go after the Frigibacks, even after the Radiant Greninja here with the Shred being online. And here we go, Roaring Moon found finally.
Regan even checking to see what the second attack does, which is definitely not very common, but that Shred attack doing 130 is enough to take down the Radiant Greninja or take down this Frigibacks and, as you mentioned, keep up with the prize trade.
And the secret has been revealed. Regan taking note of that Great Tusk right away, and I fully expect him to keep his deck size above 5 cards for the rest of the game from here on out.
Yep, that is a very important thing to keep a note of. Regan had no indication of it, and you could definitely tell by his surprise that it was not something he expected, and I think that's reasonable, and I really hope if Jake ends up winning this, that Juancho asks him about it in the winner's interview.
We see that counter catcher is being played. Radiant Greninja the choice. I like this decision. Frigibacks is not very great to KO when your opponent already has Baxcalibur. Take out that Greninja, limit some of the draw, especially with no Bibarel set up on Regan's side. Now, can Regan find a way to get a KO here? Not sure that he has it lined up in the hand right now. I think there may be a superior, so he can at least knock something out, but where does he go from there? And that's, I think, what Regan is trying to figure out.
Yeah, the lack of support Pokemon in Greninja or Bibarel will start to be noticeable as the game progresses. Regan is holding Pokestop, does have Irida in hand, also has that Iron Hands, has the Superior Energy Retrieval.
Plenty of
That's
plays.
Good enough for this particular turn, but as you mentioned, Chip, what do you do afterwards? It's all about the getting to the late game and drawing your 6 prizes. Sure, you can get one more this turn, but then you're running out of cards to even use Superior Energy Retrieval.
This could be another great turn to go for the Hyper Blower with that that Iron Bundle that's in his discard pile. Regan would need to find a Super Rod to put it back into the deck, holding on to a few Pokestop. I think he has a chance to do just that. We'll see if that's the line he tries to go down. He is going to get a count of the Ancient cards in his opponent's discard pile. I think with the 60 damage on Chien-Pao, it's definitely in range of being KO'd by a Roaring Moon.
Yep.
But Koraidon just not able to do the same amount of damage as a Roaring Moon, and Regan has done a great job of trying to abuse that fact, make this be the only attacking option for Jake turn after turn.
I think Regan's debating whether to Cypher Maniac before the Pokestop. He will end up doing that, so we could see the Super Rod that you mentioned, Chip, along with a Nest Ball in order to get back that Iron Bundle, right? But you have to think that at this point, Jake has to give up on the Greninja. There's no way you cannot keep on using Shred. You're down your 2 counter catchers. Your boss is priced as well, so you have no access to it. So you need to make something happen, and it has to be the Roaring Moon that survives this turn.
Now, if Jake does send up the Radiant Greninja, the next question becomes, can Regan use Iron Hands EX this turn?
Yep.
He can.
The third
he couldn't
card.
have before, but finds that Earthen Vessel. that opens up a lot of opportunities. He's got so many available plays here.
That is huge, Chip. Not only because it would allow Regan to take 2 prize cards, but would also mean Jake needs to go above and beyond to hit that 230 damage, and that requires 16 ancient cards, and I'm not sure we're quite there yet. I wish we could have that ancient counter.
Yeah, not quite there just yet, but Regan actually not going to utilize the Iron Bundle. I think that would have been such a strong play right now. Instead, will grab back that Radiant Greninja, try to draw a few more cards, and more than likely we'll just see him get through this active Koraidon. Maybe he'll try to go for his Radiant Greninja play we saw in game number 2, but that play is made a lot less viable when your opponent has Ancient Booster Energy Capsule on those Ancient Pokemon. It puts them out of range of being 2-hit KO'd by a pair of Moonlight Shuriken.
Indeed, so no Iron Hands play just quite yet, Chip. It's still in the cards for the future, but not quite yet. Now we're going to see that concealed cards get Regan more and more resources, but this is where things could spiral a little bit out of control. You have enough cards to keep drawing enough in order to keep up with the price trade, but at some point Regan will need to continue to use the 2 prizers, and Jake should be able to finish off this Qianpao eventually.
And I believe we have just gotten confirmation 11 ancient cards in the lost zone, or sorry, in the discard pile at the moment. No lost zone counter, discard pile counter. This is bringing me back to those Garbotoxin days, or
exactly.
Trashalanche days, I should say. Here we are, and Regan is bringing up the Radiant Greninja here. He does not have a Lost Vacuum in his list, so I'm not sure that this play is going to work out for him in the long run.
Indeed, he's going to have to attack 3 times to get 2 prize cards. Can knock out the Greninja over the course of 2 turns, but that certainly will not be enough. And no, just going for the triple concealed card setup to take down the Greninja and the Koraidon in over the course of 3 turns. As you mentioned, 3 turns to take 2 prize cards, not very cost effective. And Vengeance Fletching is now doing 180 damage.
And Nestball is now able to establish another Roaring Moon into play. The tide is certainly turning in Jake Ewart's favor, trying to catapult Ancient Box into the finals, where we know who one of our finalists will be. Liam Halliburton was able to take down Joshua Frank and their Gardevoir deck, so Liam is taking Charizard EX into the finals.
Indeed, congratulations to Liam Charizard EX, to nobody's surprise, right? Once again in the finals, potentially winning back-to-back events, but it's going to be up to Jake or Regan to stop Liam.
Jake debating the Superior Energy Retrieval, going to retreat first, however. Could discard a couple more Ancient Pokemon. Doesn't need to right now. 11 in the discard pile, more than enough for Vengeance Fletching to KO a Radiant Greninja. Yet another Ancient Booster Energy Capsule being placed into play. But will go with this Superior Energy Retrieval. Has not used Radiant Greninja this turn, I do not believe, so that could be playing into the decision-making here. Just wants to draw a few more cards, try to utilize multiple turns of Greninja if he can.
Indeed, getting that energy attachment as well. Now with 2 Roaring Moons fully powered up, it's going to be very difficult for Regan to deal with both of them. This will pretty much guarantee Jake has back-to-back attacks at the very least. And we'll have to see if Regan can navigate this. He must have a plan with the Radiant Greninja, but I'm not sure what it's going to be.
Not quite sure it will work out. Jake uses the Pokestop, discarding a couple more Ancient cards and also adding the Super Rod to his hand, using one of those good old school Neo Super Rods with the thick yellow borders. Jake with 4 prizes remaining will jump ahead in the prize trade for the first time in this match, and it'll be up to Regan Retzloff to find a path to even things back up once again.
Seems like we have 16 cards in the discard pile with the Ancient feature now, meaning Vengeance Fletching will do 230 damage. So now even the Iron Hands EX is in range.
So I think what Regan has done with his play here is that he is aiming to use Iron Hands EX 2 times to win this game. He can Iron Hands EX this active Pokemon here, and then Iron Hands EX to KO either the Koraidon or the Radiant Greninja. Jake Ewart cannot penny both of those Pokemon out of play. The question is just going to be, does Regan have the resources to pull off that hefty attack twice in a row? He'll need 4 energy cards on Iron Hands EX, and he'll also need energy cards to retreat whichever Pokemon he sends to the active each turn. Can he do it, Pablo? Are the resources available to pull off this play?
I think the biggest hurdle, though, will be that Silene. How do you find the Silene? There's no more Greninja once again. There's no more Bibarel to help you find. The second Bidoof just hit the discard pile off of the Pokestop. So how are you going to be able to find the Silene? And then you need to flip at least one heads to put the the prime catcher, at the top. And then you need to draw it somehow, probably with the Pokestop. So a lot of things required for Regan. Has paved the path, as you mentioned, for 2 KOs on these 2 Pokemon with Iron Hands back to back. But that sounds like a very difficult task to accomplish.
And potentially, if Jake is unable to find another basic Pokemon to put down, we could see Iron Bundle get added into the mix as a way to force one of the Pokemon into the active position. But Jake will probably try to be aware of that situation, maybe go out of his way to bench some other high HP Pokemon that Iron Hands cannot KO.
Yeah, that's very true. The Iron Bundle, I certainly forgot about that. We'll have to see the attachment here into the Iron Hands, and Regan will put himself 1 attack away potentially.
Will he be able to find the Silene is the big question. It is hanging around in the deck somewhere. 4 cards being brought back from the Superior Energy Retrieval, and perhaps in this position, like you mentioned, Pablo, as the game goes on, we see the negative effects of not having Radiant Greninja and Bibarel in play.
Superior Energy Retrieval prize, so having Super Rod, having another Superior Energy Retrieval, having the Silene, having all those pieces to attack twice with Iron Hands feels very, very difficult. Not impossible, right? But we might need to see a Silene top deck, honestly, at this point, with no Greninja and no Bibarel in play.
Now, Regan does have the Cypher Maniac's code breaking, so maybe some combination of that with the Pokestop could get him the necessary cards. I think he did also take a Superior off the prizes, so is potentially holding one of those in hand. Remember, yeah, he did prize 2 copies.
Yep.
Jake is going to send up the Roaring Moon. We'll see how he navigates this turn. I think one thing I would definitely love to see, based on our discussion that we've just had, Pablo, is benching another Roaring Moon. Or even a Koraidon, even if a Pokemon that you don't really want to attack with, put it into play because it's something that does not get KO'd to amp you very much.
Jake does have the penny in hand, though, so could easily pick up this Koraidon and re-bench it.
Yes.
Even without the tool, that would be enough. But the question is, can Jake see through Regan's plan? He might be feeling pretty confident that the Prime Catcher is gone.
Yes.
Not aware about the Silene, perhaps?
Yeah, definitely could be a potential thing here. Silene is not the most popular inclusion in Chien Pao decks, but it's not that uncommon either. Something that if you pay attention to results, if you paid attention to the lists that did well at EUIC, or you look at online tournaments, you should be able to be aware of that being a potential option. Super Rod is being played. 3 energy and Pokemon shuffled from the discard pile back into the deck. Looks like Roaring Moon will come back into action.
Now this will change the ancient card counter just a little bit, so I'm sure Jake will be very aware of that and try to make sure that he has enough cards in the discard pile to get the KO. But it's going to be rough, Chip. It might all hang on that Silene if Jake is aware that the Iron Bundle could be recycled at any moment.
Jake is able to get back 2 ancient cards here, I believe, with 18 ancient cards in the discard pile. He does need 16 down in order to get this KO, but as it turns out, just 1 Roaring Moon will go back to the deck. Should move that counter down to 17 now. perhaps back up to 19 with that Earthen Vessel and a Flutter Mane being discarded. 2 more Ancient cards into the mix.
I think with the discard of the Roaring Moon, yeah, we'll get a check, but there's definitely enough.
There's enough.
There's
yes.
enough.
Iron
So
Hands is going down. That is for sure.
that is 100% happening. Now we're going to see the guidance, so no penny, but if we bench the Roaring Moon, we're still fine. Or even the Koraidon, right? If we bench the Roaring Moon, we're protected from the Iron Bundle.
Yes.
So now it all comes down to
it's
this
going to be
Silene.
Silene, and it's going to have to be the top deck here for Regan, unless he can potentially find a way to get back the Radiant Greninja, and then draw into it after that. Yeah, a few things that, top decking the Silene would certainly make things much easier here for Regan Retzloff. Jake Ewart right now has 0 cards remaining in deck, so something he's doing and has to make sure to do is to refill that with either a Palpad or Super Rod. He does have both available to him. Has not seen an Iono from his opponent. I think at this point you can probably make the call. Iono's not in Regan's list. And we'll put back just the 1 copy of Professor Sada's Vitality.
Now, who would have thought this early hero Koraidon taking down that poor Bidoof could end up being the game-winning play after Jake started off in a very slow fashion, barely doing 60 damage, but turns out that was just enough.
Vengeance Fletching takes the KO. Jake Ewart down to just 1 prize card remaining. It's all going to come down to this, Pablo. What's the draw for turn? Chien Pao EX. That is not
quite
what Regan needed. He needed to find the Silene and doesn't see it here. Now, it's not quite over yet. If he can use maybe Pokestop into a Nest Ball plus Super Rod, something like that. I mean,
does have Ultra Ball in hand to search for the Greninja, but then that's so many cards, right? And you need an
also
energy
need to,
to retreat now.
And you also need to get the Iron Hands back and get that into play.
It's so much, Chip. I don't know if Regan has it.
But these are the type of plays that separate. No, he's not even going for it. Regan concedes the game, and Jake Ewart becomes the finalist here in Orlando.
Jake pulling that off really well done, and I really gotta give him props for that second game, that clutch penny at the end to take away the Iron Hands target in that Greninja. I think that alone won him the whole series.